All right. So, welcome everyone. Those of you that have turned in your work, like I said, thank you very much. Todo el trabajo que me han entregado esta última semana, me parece muy bien, and we'll be having our new issue of Conchas y Café zine. This will be volume 6, issue number 1, coming out in about 3 weeks or so. So, ahí los mantendré en comunicación conmigo. Van a recibir su copia igual como la copia digital muy pronto. So hopefully the next issue will have our reading kind of right before we start the next series. So yeah. And I'm kind of excited about it. I think that, this will be a really interesting new year for our Conchas y Café zine. Volume 6 is already kind of just like the last issue, peregrinations, showing a lot of signs of, the times. And I think that it's great that we're recording basically what we're experiencing right now through COVID-19 and the pandemic. So I think very unique time in history, and I'm glad that we're capturing it on in poetry and literature. So, muy bien hecho a todos. Esta semana lo que vamos a repasar va a ser más informativo. Yo creo que va a dar la oportunidad de interactuar. But, today's lesson is about publishing, and those of you that are interested in developing your own manuscript and preparing for it. So I'll be talking a lot, and most of the time we'll be in presentation mode. Ojalá y tengan oportunidad de hacer preguntas durante la lección. Feel free to unmute yourselves if you do have a question, and we'll hopefully work it out that way. Because I'll be sharing my screen, I may not be able to see you as you're, raising your hand or anything. So just go ahead and unmute yourselves when you have a question, and feel free to stop me. So, like I said, we're in the middle of preparing for volume 6, issue number 1, que todavía no tiene su título, así que esta semana su tarea va a ser de ofrecerme sus sugerencias del título. But, as we begin to sort of prepare for a new issue, or at least as I begin to prepare for a new issue, there's a lot of things that I usually take into consideration when it comes to how to prepare a manuscript. And so, esta semana lo que vamos a repasar va a ser los formatos típicos de publicación, and how maybe some of these will actually help you in terms of your own goals for eventually publishing maybe a manuscript, whether that be as, a simple mini zine, or turning it into a full-on magazine, or even a book. So here, para que vean, les hice una tabla que enseña lo que son los varios formatos en que típicamente se imprenta información. And the first one is probably the most common one that we see on a regular basis, and that would be pamphlets and brochures. Y en español se llaman folletos. Los folletos típicamente se crean usando solo una hoja de papel, and they normally will be made using a sheet of paper that is 8.5 by 11, or up to an 8.5 by 13-inch sheet of paper. Cuando se dobla, porque típicamente folletos son doblados, you'll have either a single fold, double fold, or a triple fold. Eso es lo que significa aquí estas marcaciones o indicaciones. Y hay varias maneras en que normalmente se usan, pero en el caso típico es informativo o promocional. Right? So it's normally an informational or promotional material that you'll get out of a pamphlet or brochure. You can think of it almost like a flyer. Para darles ejemplos, aquí también hice esta presentación. Y no es exactamente un folleto, es un mini zine, pero aquí es algo pequeño que normalmente se considera como un folleto. The next size or the next type of publication that you might come across is going to be called a broadside. Un costado, como se llama en español, típicamente se hace con otra vez solo una hoja de papel. This type of publication is sometimes, most of the time, I should say, 1 page or 2 pages, if you think of it as being the front of the paper and the back of the paper. So, si saca una copia de 2 lados, sería esa hoja sencilla con 1 o 2 páginas que tiene información imprentado. Now, a broadside could be something as small as your 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Or it can even go up to an 18 by 24 and still be considered a broadside. Although that is more of a poster size, an 18 by 24 inch is still considered a broadside, especially if you have like information or promotional work on it. Aparte de tener información o algún tipo de promoción como un cartel, también puede tener arte visual, puede ser un cómic, fotografías, lo que uno quiera. Y también literatura. Obviamente este tamaño, el 18 por 24 pulgadas, es un tamaño bastante grande como para poder ponerle un poema o hasta un cuento corto. For those of you that got a chance to visit the bus shelter artwork that's in Boyle Heights in front of the Benjamin Franklin Branch Library, when we put up the artwork from the No Fake News workshops, that's kind of, it's a poster, but it's also sort of the broadside size. And so puede tener literatura y arte, como ven. Y también típicamente se puede ver con propaganda, como en el caso de los tiempos antiguos. The reason why I added propaganda as a possible use for this is because for those of you that might remember history and the Reformation in the Catholic Church, the propaganda that Martin Luther used to sort of break away from the Catholic Church, that he printed that on a broadside, and that was something that was then used, on the doors of churches and houses and things like that. So ahí tienen lo que son las opciones de un costado. Ahora, para seguir, también obviamente existen los periódicos y revistas. Newspapers and magazines are interesting publications because when we're talking about the size of the sheet of paper, we're talking about the whole sheet of paper that's not folded or anything. Aquí es a donde se empieza a usar hojas de papel más grandes y se usan con la idea de que se van a doblar, se van a usar de otra manera, se van a manipular. The fact that you're printing on an 11 by 17 inch paper, which is called a tabloid size paper, or something as big as an 18 by 24 inch paper that's then folded, that's how you get that look of a newspaper. And on the smaller side, an 11 by 17 inch paper is going to be folded in half so that it becomes an 8.5 by 11. Este tipo de papel normalmente también tiene algún tipo de acabado. So it's not going to be just your plain blank, your normal standard paper. Most of the time there's a special kind of coating on them, or in the case of newspapers, it's using a particular kind of paper called newsprint. Papel de periódico es muy distinto y pues yo les explicaré un poquito más por qué tiene esa distinción de ser papel de periódico, pero normalmente para crear un periódico o una revista típicamente se usan entre 15 a 25 hojas de papel, a veces un poquito más, y en páginas normalmente eso cuando se dobla se duplica por 4. So you'll see here, right, if you're using, say, 15 sheets of paper, when it's folded, you'll end up with 60 pages. And that's because you're counting one side, then the other side, then the verso and the reverso of the other side that's folded. Hopefully that makes sense. But basically, a folded sheet of paper at the 11 by 17 inch side will produce 4 pages. And so for most newspapers or magazines, that's why you end up with potentially 60 pages. Como pueden ver aquí, when it comes to binding options, normally it's going to be folded, stapled, or stitched. The fold is usually just once, so it's folded in half. Cuando se dobla, obviamente eso va a crear la doblada en el mero centro de la hoja de papel, y eso se puede engrapar o hasta se puede usar hilo, y se puede luego después tejer para encuadernar la publicación. Stitching, just like stapling, has a very specific term in graphic design, and that's called saddle stitch. And that is the type of binding that normally you would see in a magazine. Although more often than not, nowadays you might see magazines actually glued using the perfect binding technique. But a lot of times, newspapers is just folded. En caso del uso primario de revistas o de periódicos, normalmente es información, ¿verdad? Es información, pues, reportajes y todo eso. But obviously, there's also promotional uses aside from just the straight news that you get out of a newspaper. You can also find newsprint that is used to, say, create art or, to publish literature. And again, propaganda, right? Because all forms of publication, to a certain degree, are a type of propaganda. También normalmente uno ve cosas como cómics que se imprentan en papel de periódico. Now, moving up, you next will see zines and chapbooks. En español, los zines a veces se llaman los fanzines y libritos. En el caso de los zines y libritos, se puede usar cualquier tamaño de papel. That's kind of the beautiful thing about zines, is that the zine as a format is going to give you a lot of flexibility. Normalmente lo que se constituye un zine o un librito típicamente va a usar entre una hoja de papel hasta 15 hojas de papel. And the zine, just like with a newspaper or magazine, you technically can consider each sheet of paper to be enough for 4 pages. So that's why on here you'll see that the page count for a zine is typically between 4 and 60 pages. Although, it can vary a lot based on the design that you're creating. And they're almost always soft cover. En el caso de los periódicos y revistas, los costados y los folletos, esos normalmente no tienen una tapa, pero los zines y los libritos a veces sí tienen una tapa. Esa cubierta puede ser una imagen o puede ser pues varias cosas, ¿verdad? But a zine and chapbook is usually going to have some sort of cover, whereas the others will not, the others that we talked about. There's also a lot of different options for binding. El fanzine, yo he visto unos que usan una liga o una banda elástica para encuadernar el librito, pero también he visto usos como el sujetapapeles. A paper clip of any size, really, that's folded out and turned into just like a straight line of metal, can actually be used to stitch your zine together, just like you would with, say, actual thread and needle. But there's also the option of like a comb binding or wire, like wire rings, and even your 3-ring binding. You can buy the rings by themselves and you can bind a book that way. And that would technically be considered a zine. But chapbooks can be done that way as well. Los usos primarios de un fanzine o un librito, igual como los demás, pueden tener información, puede ser promociones de un artista o de un ideal, o que sea algo como tipo propaganda. And then, of course, art, right? Most of the time when you come across a zine or a chapbook, it'll be either like a photo zine or a poetry zine. And they're basically on that borderline of being a chapbook or, an artist book. So, zines are very, very flexible. And to give you an example of various zines, aquí otra vez tienen la imagen de un mini zine que yo he creado. Y como pueden ver, estos son los lápices que normalmente se usan en golf. So these little mini pencils kind of give you an idea of the size of a mini zine. And that's made using an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Aquí tienen los diferentes tamaños que yo he creado en zines. Of course, not all of these zines that are here are ones that I've made. Here we have one that's done by Carrie Trailer, who's one of our participants in Conchas. This one right here is a little happy birthday mini zine that was made by one of our old mentees in the mentorship program. And then the little one down here that says hi, that's one that I made actually using a Post-it note. So you can make a mini zine basically out of any size sheet of paper. Aquí tienen otro ejemplo de un mini zine que yo he creado. This one is one where, and I've taught this before, but it's the same mini zine format using an accordion fold and also a cut to turn it into an accordion snake. Pero como pueden ver aquí, se extiende la hoja de papel y ahí ven cómo se puede leer el poema. And this one is a fun poem because this one is one that I created that's very interactive. So you can fold it in multiple ways and still be able to read it. Aquí tienen otro ejemplo de cómo se dobla esta hoja de papel. And that's one of the ways in which you can sort of create an interactive version of a zine. Aquí tienen otro, and this one is actually using an 11 by 17 inch sheet of paper. So you see the format of the zine changes a little bit. The size is a little bit bigger. And you can have, like, say, just simple black and white drawings. Este está engrapado. So something like this one, you can actually staple and keep it from being able to be opened up. And, it's one of the many little zines that DSTL Arts has sold in the past. This one is done by one of the mentees named Denise Salas. Here's another one that has a little bit of a combination of hand-drawn artwork and also digitally placed text. So, igual como cualquier otro tipo de publicación, se puede hacer a mano y también se puede hacer usando la computadora. Y este está creado por Zach o Zacarías Reyes, que es uno de los estudiantes en el programa de tutoría en arte. Zach basically gave me the digital illustrations in this case, and I set it for him on a sheet of paper. Pero aquí ven cómo se puede utilizar solo una hoja de papel para aún crear un librito. So these little mini zines right here are, all still available actually through the DSTL Arts website, I believe. And, it's different ways in which you can actually approach a mini zine. This is also something that I figured I'd share with you guys. If you want to get the directions that you can have physically for making a mini zine, I actually created the mini zine maker pack. And this comes basically with everything that you see here. It's the directions on how to make a mini zine, which is a zine itself. You also get a colored pencil and a regular mini pencil. You get a pre-made template. So a mini zine that's already pre-folded and pre-cut for you. You get a couple of DSTL Arts stickers and some pages out of a random magazine. So you can get started on making your own. Aquí también tienen otro ejemplo de un mini zine que he creado, and this is actually an old issue of Art Block. This is from the second year of Art Block, so it's volume 2, issue 1, City of Angels. And this one was, I think, the last time that we made it by hand. This one uses 8.5 by 13 inch sheets of paper, and 8.5 by 13 is considered legal size paper. This one, it actually folds out. Some of you might have seen it in the past. It folds out, and here you might be able to see with the connection points where we actually used glue to stick the paper together so that it continually folds out. It's just sheets of paper folded in half and then glued together so that you get this roll of paper that keeps on going and going. Aquí tienen otro ejemplo de un mini zine. Este fue creado por mi hermana, fíjense. My sister actually created this series of mini zines a while back, and it's all collaged. Y como pueden ver aquí, para encuadernar los libritos, los mini zines, ella usó listón. This is actually ribbon that you see along the edges. She used a single hole punch, and she just punched in the holes there, uh, where she then actually threaded the ribbon right through all the sheets of paper. So it's a really unique and interesting way to, bind a zine. Here's another example of that. So again, see here, she just used different types of ribbon. Hizo los hoyos con una herramienta que se usa para hacer hoyos en papel. Y así, hizo básicamente trenzas para hacer sus scenes. This is the inside. As you can see, it's all collaged on the inside and replicated using a copy machine. So un fotocopiador creo ella fue a Kinko's para hacer estos mini zines. Aquí tienen otro ejemplo de un zine que yo hice. This collection of zines is called Dokudo, and this one I did entirely on the computer. Y aquí, como pueden ver, usé, básicamente fue un taladro. I actually drilled these holes because the zine itself is very thick. So I had to use a power tool to actually drill the holes, and then with a needle and thread, I tejí aquí encuadernación del librito este. Aquí está otra foto en que enseña cómo se fue sujetando el hilo para encuadernar el librito. So zines definitely do give you a lot of flexibility in terms of size, textures, color. You can do black and white color, a lot of different things that you can do. Aquí tienen un ejemplo de uno que es básicamente como una revista. So like I was saying with the magazine format, this right here was actually created using tabloid size paper. So this is a 11 by 17 inch paper that's folded in half. And this one is a zine, a chapbook, technically, because this one is completely done using computer. Brian, this was his very, very first publication that we actually produced through DSTL Arts. The very first chapbook of anybody that we ever had the privilege of working with. So aquí tienen un ejemplo de cómo se ve, bueno, parcialmente, ¿verdad? Pero cómo se ve una hoja de papel del tamaño 11 por 17 pulgadas, doblado y hecho en un zine. Aquí tienen otro ejemplo que también fue creado por Brian. Brian and I worked really closely on this one to make sure that it actually captured a lot of the design elements that he wanted. He wanted something kind of minimalist. And this one was made using legal size paper that was folded in half and then stapled in the middle to make his second chapbook of poetry. Aquí tienen otro ejemplo del mismo libro. Este librito aquí, como pueden ver, usó grapas para engraparlo. So, simple, basic staple binding, but very effective way of binding a chapbook. Aquí está otro ejemplo hecho por Brian. This one's a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper folded in half and then cut down to be 5 inches across the top and then 8 inches down the side. So this is actually a little bit smaller than your typical zine. Cuando está doblado sale a 4 pulgadas creo es por 5. So it's a 4 by 5 when it's actually folded in half. And there's another picture of it. It's a really nice format, a really nice size. one of the main things about creating a zine like this or a chapbook like this is that there are certain limitations to how many sheets of paper you can actually staple together. Una engrapadora típica, lo que se encuentra en casa, normalmente no puede engrapar más de 15 hojas de papel, a veces hasta 20. So having that 20 sheet of paper limit might actually reduce your ability to put together a chapbook by hand like this, or a zine in this way, because there's only so much that a standard at-home residential size, we'll call it, stapler can handle. Now, if you go industrial, then you can actually do a little bit more, but you also need the industrial nails, and you'll probably also need an industrial cutter in order to be able to cut off some of the excess sheets of the excess parts of the paper that sort of bleed out when you sandwich the paper together. Aquí tienen otro ejemplo del mismo tamaño. This is another one that was also folded in half and then cut to be a 4 by 5 inch chapbook. And another example right here. This one's by Angie. You guys all hopefully remember Angie. This is a zine or chapbook that was done on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that was just simply folded in half and also stapled. And this is right here, shows you an example of how reproducing photography on a standard sheet of paper kind of looks. Normalmente la nitidez de una imagen cuando se imprenta en blanco y negro en una hoja de papel estándar no siempre es lo mejor. Pero aún así se puede transmitir la imagen y en el caso del presupuesto de uno, quizá que no pueda pagar los costos asociados con un tipo de papel un poquito mejor, por lo menos ahí se puede usar siempre un papel estándar. That's going to be one of the main questions that you'll probably ask yourselves if you decide to self-produce a mini zine or a zine or a chapbook that's using paper. Standard paper doesn't always reproduce the best, but it does at least get the message across. Y aquí tienen otro ejemplo de cómo se puede crear un zine. This is the old way in which the Conchas y Café zines used to be produced. They were always done by hand, with me doing the color printing of the cover at home using a color printer, but then everything was stapled and folded by hand. Ustedes que han estado conmigo ya desde hace mucho tiempo saben el proceso. Ojalá se recuerdan del proceso de hacer un zine como estos. Now, the beautiful thing about doing these by hand is that you can always, design them in a way that suits you best. And so you can do handmade drawings on the pages. You can do, different types of fonts on the inside. And you don't necessarily have to worry too much about perfection. Si uno no le importa tanto la perfección cuando se trata de hacer cosas a mano, un mini zine o un zine, a un librito hecho a mano, siempre va a tener su carácter, ¿verdad? Va a tener algo de personalidad. Y para mí eso siempre me ha gustado de los zines. You can think of them as like fine art, and the approach that you take, it's always going to be unique for each individual one, which, might even mean that you can charge a little bit more for something that's handmade. Aquí tienen un ejemplo de las revistas que ahora hacemos. Art Block Zine has come a long way, and it's now actually using magazine paper. So as you can see here, the paper is a little bit glossier. It has kind of a coating on it, and it looks different, for sure. Y aquí tienen un ejemplo de cómo se ve cuando está abierto el zine. So just like I had said before, magazines use 11 by 17 inch paper that's then folded. Some of them are perfect bound. At least the ones that I produce now are perfect bound, meaning they use glue. and they actually cut the paper in half and then glue it back together in a particular order. But you can still do these by folding them in half, just like you would a regular 11 by 17 inch paper, and fold it in half and stapled down the center. Así es como se parece ahora. Again, this is using magazine grade paper. So it's a little bit thicker. It's a little bit, it has a special finish on it. This is kind of a semi-glossy finish. Para ustedes que han visto uno de estos en persona, van a saber cómo se siente el papel. Y aquí tienen la más reciente edición de Conchas y Café. So, Volume 5, Issue 3, Peregrinations. You know, now that Conchas y Café has grown so much, the 60-page limit that I used to have before for making the zines, I really can't follow that 60 pages anymore. Now we're doing zines of up to 120 pages. Y por eso ahora los zines usan diferentes métodos para imprimir. This is what you consider a perfect bound book. And, you know, there's a little bit more uniformity to a perfect bound book, especially now that, you know, I'm doing them digitally this way for everyone. Pero como ven, aquí está un ejemplo del papel que se usa adentro. This is standard paper. This isn't anything fancy or special, but it does reproduce text very cleanly. And I think that it is a really good option if you want to create a perfect bound book using especially the service that I use, which is called Blurb. Aquí tienen otro ejemplo de los más nuevos libros que hemos sacado. And this one, you know, has a nice soft cover, a little bit glossy. Este papel aquí es como color crema. This cream-colored paper, it's uncoated, and it's also your standard type of paper. And as you can see, it does reproduce black and white very nicely. The text and even the image that's down the center in the gutter, this is what we call the gutter of a book, it reproduces that very nicely. Aunque para algo como, hay que decir, una fotografía en color, quizá no sea lo mejor para este tipo de libro. Y aquí tienen un ejemplo de otro libro que hemos sacado. This is just to show you what the spine looks like on a perfect bound book, right? So the spine is going to have, you know, part of the cover on it. You know, it may be thick enough to put a actual little bit of text on it. It might not be, but perfect bound books are always going to be referred to perfect bound because of how clean they look on the spine. That's what makes it a perfect bound book. Aquí está otro ejemplo. Este tamaño es un 6x9. So this is a 6 by 9 inch chapbook. This is Tina's new chapbook, The Bin and Other Pieces of Trash. And this one is just one of the options that most professional printers will give you. Los nuevos libros de Conchas y Café son de tamaño 5x8. Este es 6x9. So most of the time there's very specific sizes that you'll be able to choose from if you're going with a professional printer. 5x8, 6x9, or an 8x10. And I do have some examples of 8x10s. Again, your standard paper reproducing black and white pretty well. Ahora, aquí tienen otro ejemplo. Este es un 6x9. This is a 6x9 inch chapbook. This is also done by Denise. And this one actually is an artist book. So, como artista visual, ella me dio sus dibujos y sus pinturas. Los escaneé y aquí tienen cómo se reproduce usando papel típico, papel estándar. This is actually not like a premium grade paper, but I did want to show you an example of how standard paper can actually reproduce color and images. It does look really nice, even in person. May not be the most vivid, but you know the quality of the print is still a pretty solid print. And this is pretty standard printing. Aquí tienen el más nuevo libro que yo he sacado. As you can see, you know, this particular book, it has a very thick spine. This one did cost a lot. There's a reason why I charge $90 for this particular book. And that's because I went with actually a slightly more premium paper, as those of you that own it might have noticed. En el caso de este, el papel sí es premium, pero reproduce los colores un poquito mejor. La nitidez del color de la imprenta sale un poquito mejor en este tipo de papel. Unfortunately, it is a lot more expensive to print in color and with a slightly better quality paper. Which again, that's part of the reason why I charge $90 for this particular book. This is a reproduction of my artwork in the book itself. Como ven aquí, el arte que yo escaneé y puse en este libro tiene una resolución un poquito más alta y cuando sale imprimido así, es muy cercano al original. So that's more or less what the actual original painting looks like when it comes to the reprinting, which is why I made the choice when I created this book to go with a slightly better grade paper. Aquí tienen un ejemplo del tamaño más grande que se considera, que es una de las opciones con la imprenta que yo uso. The printer that I use, Blurb, this is the biggest size that they offer in a trade paperback. It's an 8x10. Those of you that have a copy of Snapshots of South Central will know. It's a photography book that also has poetry. Y aquí tienen un ejemplo de cómo se reproduce la fotografía que se imprimió en este libro. So this is a black and white photo of mine. There's also, you can see here, a color one. The color one you can see is a little bit more grainy. The black and white, because it's black and white, will always kind of have a little bit more grain to it, but it does reproduce nicely, as does the color. And this is your standard type of paper, so nothing very fancy in terms of that. But it is a beautiful book. Para seguir aquí, lo que básicamente va a distinguir un libro normal a un librito o un chapbook va a ser el tamaño, right? So books themselves can sometimes be even smaller than your standard, 5x8 or something like that. There are books that are done in like I've seen some as small as a 2x3. So something like a small index card. That is the smallest that I've ever come across. And it can be done with a soft cover or a hard cover. That's one of the major differences between a chapbook and a book, is that sometimes books will be done as a hardcover. And the page count is almost always 48 pages or more. So 200 and plus, ¿verdad? En el caso de los libros también, normalmente el método que usan para imprimir usa una hoja de papel y se imprime en los dos lados y luego se recorta. So that printing method for books and the way that it's formatted is going to make a big difference in how many pages you get out of a single sheet of paper. And almost always you'll see that books themselves are perfect bound, so they use glue to actually bind it. Although there's also books that use stitching. A lot of times those are considered fine art or fine press books because the stitching process actually takes so long. But just like any other publication, the primary use for books is information, promotion, art of all types, literature, and of course propaganda, because basically anything in print is going to be a form of propaganda when you really think about it. So I'm going to take a quick little break there and see if anybody has any questions. So is there anybody out there that maybe didn't get anything that I was saying? ¿Hay alguna pregunta ahorita, perdón? There's a lot of stuff there in the chat I didn't even get to see. So Nettie asks, what's the paper size for the accordion zine? The little mini accordion zine is 8.5 by 11. So es papel típico, papel estándar. La manera en que lo doblé y corté es lo que lo hace parecer un poquito más grande, diría. I see Karen bought a few of those for Kalia. Human shells is pretty cool. That was part of what Brian wanted on the cover. So el diseño, colaboré con Brian para crear la tapa. Like the designs of Tongues and Tropics. Thank you, Mauricio. Yeah, that one, I was experimenting a little bit there with different design techniques. Let's see. Any tips for conceptualizing zines? Coming up with a theme is one of my challenges and ultimately stunts me from starting zines, a chapbook, as you may already know, Profe. Sorry to call you out there, Mauricio. I didn't mean to make you feel like you have trouble with that, but that's actually one of the things that you want to really think about before you start making a book. Ultimately, like, to answer Karen's question about the difference between a zine and a chapbook, thematically, they can be very similar. Un zine en comparación a un librito, no hay nada diferente en la manera en que se hacen, en que se reproducen. Un zine quizá va a tener una edición limitada. La tira va a ser quizá limitada. The print run of a zine is probably, because of cost, going to be a lot less than, say, a chapbook that's done by a publisher. Publishers a lot of times will do print runs of 100 and more on the low side, even. So, there's not much of a difference between a chapbook and a zine. It's just going to come down to how you personally define it. And if it's going to be all poetry, because of how short it is, it's probably going to be better to keep it very strong thematically. En el caso de un libro más grande, algo de 100 páginas o más, el tema del libro va a ser quizá un poquito más flexible. Puede tener capítulos, puede ser diferentes temas en el mismo libro que se unen con un tema un poco más grande. There's a lot of different approaches that you can take to making a book and to making a zine. But when it comes to a zine specifically, you really need to think about structure. What is the format that you want to use? And what are the limitations of that format? And that will help you really come to whatever theme or whatever work you want to keep in that particular zine. ¿Hay alguna otra pregunta? And feel free to unmute yourselves if you prefer to ask the question in voz alta. No? I don't see any other hands. All right. So, hay una segunda página al folleto que les subí. So we'll go over that last page of the handout. Now, so this last page is going to have some of those questions that I was asking, right? Some of the things that you may you want to consider as part of your particular zine. I don't know what I just did. There we go. Hopefully you can see it. If you can't see it, unmute yourselves and let me know. But there's different things to consider as you start to formulate your publication, we'll call it, because it could be anything, right? It could be a pamphlet. It could be even just a simple flyer, like a single-sided flyer that you call art, and a zine. Really, a zine is whatever you make and how you define it. But you want to ask yourself, what kind of manuscript are you going to develop? ¿Va a ser un manuscrito que es solo arte o es solo literario? ¿Voy a impartir información? en la forma de tablas o de información gráfica, right? Because even a manuscript that contains graphs and tables and pie charts and stuff like that, that's still a form of a publication. And you can create artistic renditions of pie charts. Va a ser una combinación, va a ser a la vez arte y también poesía y también gráficos, cosas que impartan información. Right? So what kind of manuscript are you developing? And it also helps to ask yourself, who is my audience? Si mi audiencia es gente literaria y también gente que son bilingüe, entonces yo con más confianza voy a poner mi poesía que es bilingüe en mi manuscrito. So, keeping in mind who your audience is going to definitely help you sort of come up with your theme. And speaking of theme, how are you going to organize your work? And how are you going to curate it? Yo cuando empiezo a formar los zines de Conchas y Café, yo típicamente tomo el trabajo de cada uno de ustedes y lo empiezo a organizar y comisariar de manera que para mí fluye, como si fuera un álbum de música. That's usually my tip for those of you that are developing a manuscript is, start to really think of your work as kind of like a mixtape. Which poem is going to sound better before X poem and Y poem? Should your poem Z be the first poem, even though it was the last poem that you wrote? The way in which you curate your work is going to be very important for the way that people enjoy your work. A veces tenemos poemas que tienen conversación. A veces tenemos poemas que van con una fotografía en particular y es necesario tener los fondos en su manuscrito. Así que consideren la manera en que van a organizar su trabajo y luego así empiezan a formar el manuscrito entero. Also, we have to be honest with ourselves. Part of the reason why we're at this point is because we want people to see our work. So think about, what are the strategies you're going to use to actually promote it? Are you just going to do guerrilla style promotion and just drop it off at a library, in a coffee shop para el que lo quiera llevar, se lo lleve y lo lea en el momento que les dé tiempo? Is there going to be a marketing strategy that involves using social media? Do you have single pages that are going to stand alone and also at the same time help a reader, have interest in the whole thing? How are you gonna go about promoting your publication? And of course, you want to ask yourselves, are you going to self-publish or is this something you want to submit to a publisher? What is your budget for this? And that's going to sometimes actually make a difference. Especialmente cuando se trata de autopublicación o publicar algo por medio de una editorial. Porque una editorial, ellos sí van a tener el tiempo para diseñar el libro y van a tener el tiempo y los recursos para el mercadeo. Pero al último, ese trabajo de promocionar el libro de uno va a caer siempre en los hombros de uno mismo, ya sea por una publicación publicada, por autopublicación o por una editorial. And that's been generally my experience with writers that I've known. A lot of times they have to be the ones to actually promote their work on their own. They have to be the ones to set up readings. They have to be the ones to order books and make sure that they get delivered to a bookstore, especially an independent bookstore. Self-publishing basically ends up being the same as if you were being published by another larger publishing house. The distribution network will be different with the publisher, though. They sometimes will have a bigger distribution network. Ahora, cuando se habla de los fondos, ¿verdad? Cuando se habla del presupuesto para los materiales en impresión, that's kind of really where you have to make some of those decisions in the end. And it a lot of times will come down to how much money do you want to earn, right? How much do you want to earn in royalties, and how is that going to affect your printing costs versus your final sale price? El libro más caro que yo he comprado ha sido un libro de fotografía que me costó $75. That for me was kind of a lot of money, $75. But when I made that choice to actually buy that book for $75, it was because the quality of the printing was spectacular. It was a photography book, and on top of that, it came with another bundle of mini zines that were very unique and specific to that particular project. Así que si uno va a tomar el tiempo para hacer algo que se puede considerar como una bella arte, como un arte fino, a veces sí vale la pena pagar un poquito más para el papel mejor y luego cobrar más cuando se viene tiempo de cobrar. So those are some of those questions you want to start asking yourself. Do you want to at least make enough to cover the cost of your materials, not even worry about your final sale price, right? To make money. Those are things that you can ask yourself. Of course, how much money can you spend on materials, just the materials by itself? How much of your own time do you want to spend, sitting there at a copy machine and, making copies using FedEx Kinko's copy machines? Si la impresión va a ser independiente o profesional, a veces, si lo va a mandar a una imprenta profesional, les van a cobrar menos si van a imprimir entre 200 a 500 copias, ¿verdad? But if you're doing it by yourself, and if you're, say, only doing a print run of 50, you might end up spending actually less if you're doing it on your own. You gotta keep in mind, right? Anything that's done in mass is usually gonna bring the cost down. When it comes to design, how much of your time do you want to invest in the design process and production process too? Si uno está haciendo algo a mano, no es solo el tiempo que se toma en crear el patrón y lo que van a luego usar para sacar copias, sino también vamos a tener que incluir el tiempo que toma para luego doblar y cortar el zine. A lot of times I've underestimated how long it takes to actually fold and cut and staple zines. And there I am at the last minute, even actually at the table at the LA Zine Fest, folding and cutting mini zines so that I have them ready to sell. So you got to take into account how much of your personal time are you willing to take in that production process. It's also really important to ask yourself just simply how many pages does my project need? Si va a ser una colección de haiku son poemas muy pequeñas. Y si es una colección de, hay que decir, 10, quizá 10 páginas, es un formato es una cantidad que requiere un formato más pequeño. And if it's only going to be 10 haiku, you could easily get away with doing maybe like 2 pages, 2 haiku per page, or something similar to that, and then doing maybe 2 or 3 sheets of paper folded in half and stapled or stitched. Very simple process. And that's going to then lead you to that question of, what are you actually making? Are you making a pamphlet, a broadside? Are you going to go all out and make a newspaper and do these amazing covers and artwork on newsprint paper? Or do you want something a little bit more glossy, like a magazine? A zine or a chapbook could be an option if you want to do both handmade and also digitally typeset. Or is it going to require enough pages to actually fill a book, right? A full-length book. And in the end, you might just decide, you know what? An ebook is maybe the best option. Algo digital quizás sea la opción ideal para su proyecto. Also ask yourselves, how DIY do you want it to look? That fine art, fine press book look does get you more money if you do it in a way that basically makes sense. Tokodo, the one example that I showed you where I actually used the power drill, that one I sold at $12 each. But I did it so that, I could reduce the costs. The size of it, being only the size of an index card, helped me actually print 4 pages to a single sheet of 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that I then just cut. And so out of one single sheet of paper, I got 4 books, four individual pages for a book. And then that particular set I did as a very limited run. So because it's a special edition, limited run, handmade, and all of that stuff, and printed in color, it did allow me to charge $12 for it. And I sold out. So those of you out there that actually own a copy of Dokodo, any one of the 3, congratulations. I'm never making it again, which does increase the value of it over time. ¿Cuál proceso van a usar? También es una pregunta muy importante. ¿Va a ser algo generado por medio de software en su computadora? ¿Van a tener el acceso a ese software a lo largo? If you are using a free version of, say, Photoshop or something like that, and you're using that to typeset your work or to create a zine, is that something that in the long term you're going to have access to? That's a really good question to ask yourself. Si va a ser hecho a mano, pues collaje siempre es un formato que sí toma tiempo, pero para mí por lo menos es algo que yo encuentro muy agradable. And then in the end later too, if you decide to do something handmade, you can always sell the originals, the original pages as like a special collector edition. What distribution channels will you use to actually sell and ship your zine or your publication? Si vas a mandar un zine por medio del correo, eso cuesta muy diferente. Los costos son muy diferentes en comparación a FedEx o UPS, especialmente porque el peso es lo que normalmente afecta lo que cuesta el envío. So that might also affect your choice in the type of zine or publication that you want to create, because shipping costs can be kind of high depending on the format that you're using. And then, of course, there's the type of paper, right? So here at the very bottom of the handout, we have the different types of paper options that exist and what I would recommend you consider when you're using them. Newsprint, like I said, is a very unique type of paper. It's a thinner paper. All of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it. But it's considered 30-pound to 35-pound paper. So it's thin, it's easily tearable. No dura mucho tiempo lo que es papel de periódico, pero sí reproduce blanco y negro y color, aunque sea menos nítido. Pero es un look que sí es algo deseable. I've seen some really cool, artistically rendered newspaper type of publications that really take advantage of the format. So it's definitely an option for doing something kind of compelling. Papel estándar se considera papel de 50 o 60 pound o libras. El color, cuando se reproduce en papel estándar, sí se ve más o menos bien, dependiendo del tipo de papel que sea y del acabado que tenga, pero normalmente es lo ideal para imprimir en solo blanco y negro, which is part of the reason why the Conchas y Café zines are always done in black and white, because it's a cost-saving thing, number one, and number two, because it's a lot easier to take copies in black and white or to scan work in black and white. I already know that standard paper is the better option for our Conchas y Café zines. Premium paper, it does come at a premium. It is more expensive. It's almost 2 to 3 times more expensive than standard paper. It's anywhere between 70 and 80 pound paper. Sometimes even it goes up to 100 pound. And that is definitely the best for black and white with some color. So if your focus is more on the black and white than it is on the color, but you do have, say like a couple of photos or drawings that are in color, you might want to actually spring on the premium paper. Especialmente porque si uno va a usar gráficos de informativos o fotografía o dibujos o pinturas en su trabajo, sí vale la pena pagar un poquito más para el papel premium. Ahora, si es un libro que es completamente imágenes, o la mayoría es imágenes, ya sea fotografías o dibujos o pinturas que se van a reproducir, para eso yo recomiendo que usen papel fotográfico o papel artístico, que a veces se llama. Photo and art paper can be as light as 80 pound, but also up to 140 pound paper. 140 pound paper is very thick. It's like double the thickness. But that type of paper is perfect for a lay flat design. So that when you open the book, it lays completely flat as opposed to having this kind of like bend to it. So it is a paper that's much more expensive. You'll probably want to use less images if you're going with that, but it reproduces black and white beautifully, and color is spectacular on art paper or photo paper. So ahí tienen las opciones de diferentes papeles, lo que yo recomiendo para imprimir. Y las preguntas, que son muy importantes cuando se trata de crear un scene. So, preguntas? I know that was a lot, but and next week I'm going to have still another lesson for you guys in case you want to learn more about how to begin budgeting for a project. So, déjame ver aquí. Guerrilla style promotion. Yeah, Karen. I agree. I love it too. I think that's a great technique. Let me see. Any other questions here? No, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Pero hay alguien que tenga una pregunta? Or anything that?
Oh, hey, I can. Oh.
Go ahead, Karen.
Not something, but if I can. Where am I? Sorry, I'm trying to come back. How do I come back? No, I was just gonna so thanks to you, I was able to do this because you taught us how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to use Blurb and make a book at the very beginning of COVID.
Yeah.
Remember? Yeah, and I was amazed. I pulled out my notes. I actually pulled out the notes that you gave us. And was able to figure out how to get it published through Blurb. So that was very that was very, very super useful. Yeah. So thank you.
And generally speaking, I've been using Blurb for a while, but Karen, how did you find their resources? Did you find them useful?
Man, I wish I had known. I wish I had, paid more attention because they actually have you can get the ISBN through them, which I didn't know the first time around, and I actually paid for an ISBN, which I felt really stupid afterwards.
So on the ISBN thing, and this is something that I'm going to cover later too, but when you buy the ISBN, you become the publisher of record. Whereas if you allow Blurb to add an ISBN, they end up becoming the publisher of record. So it is more important to actually spend the money on an ISBN than it is to allow somebody else to provide the ISBN for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so good to know. I guess not a total waste.
No, it's actually a good thing that you got that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyhow, thank you. I was actually really happy that, I was really happy that I had all the information right there and I was able to do it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad that you found that helpful.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. ¿Alguien más? ¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Oh, do you want to share a comment?
Yeah. What's up, Nettie?
Okay. Well, just brainstorming some marketing strategies. Well, here's one. It's taking me a lot of discipline to curate my own Instagram page. Where, for example, I mean, the goal is to write at least haikus or some kind of poem. I'm actually piling some poems there and either narrate them or pay someone to do the voice acting and make a post about it just to build a niche, right? So whenever there's a time you want to mark your book or mark your publication, you just add the link for the DSTL Arts shop on the bio, and at that time you already have a niche, you already have an audience. It takes time to curate a page, but I think it's totally worth the effort, and also we are supposed to be writing daily. Well, at least we aim to do that. Just, just, just a thought.
Yeah, I agree. And that's part of, I think, the usefulness of social media is that you can post something, and even though it's posted, and even though the image might kind of live in this world where other people can use it, but it still belongs to you. That still kind of in a way shows that you are the owner and controller of the original work, right? And that way nobody can ever dispute you later as if it was, say, plagiarized or whatever. Mauricio, I think, does actually a really good job of posting on a regular basis to his Instagram, and shares his poetry and is really building that following, I think. Mauricio, if you don't mind, what has your experience been in posting your poetry so frequently? Have you grown an audience on Instagram?
Actually, yes. But here's the caveat about that, Luis, because I've also noticed that when I do that, it's also the quality of the connections you make. Yes, I have more of a following, and I've tried to follow other motivate social media influencers like Gary Vee. He talks about interacting with other poets. So I've tried to befriend other poets and, in the same token, go on their page and comment on them and just be more active in their feed so that they kind of return the favor. It's about building a community. I've met poets posting regularly definitely helps to boost numbers, but I think my goal was always to just connect with other poets. So that first step of just putting out more content is definitely huge, but also interacting with others if that's your goal as well. If you just want to get your name out there, then yeah, constantly posting and using hashtags in your posts is always definitely brings in more audience members that follow that specific hashtag, hashtag poetry, hashtag poets of Instagram. It's incredible how much new eyes come to your post when you do use hashtags.
Yeah, exactly. But Mauricio's point is exactly on point about creating community. So no siempre es de solo subir cosas en Instagram o en Facebook o lo que sea. Esas redes sociales son para crear comunidad ante todo. Y it is kind of like a little bit of a give and take. It can become overwhelming if you're not the kind of person that likes to be on there all the time or that cares to share a lot of things. But when it comes down to it, it is a business, and you'll find a flow that works for you. You don't have to post every day. You don't even have to post every week. But as long as you're consistent about it, and if you find the right platform for you, that's what's going to really make a difference. Like a blog, for example. Si uno tiene su blog, puede uno poner su poesía solo allí y luego usar Twitter, por ejemplo, para darles una pequeña mordida de poesía a su audiencia en Twitter y luego mandarlos a que lean todo en su blog. Still posting poetry from April. See, Mauricio's got it down, right? Like you don't have to always create something brand new every time you post. It can be stuff that you already have that exists from even years ago. And you then are maybe even recycling work for new people that just joined your page. So, yeah, but marketing is definitely one of those things that you want to consider, when it comes time to put together a manuscript and create the publication. ¿Quién es mi audiencia? ¿A dónde voy para que pues, pueda vender o para que pueda compartir por lo menos mi trabajo? You have another idea? Oh, videos of you reciting your poetry. Yeah, Mauricio, that suggested that. Nettie kind of did too. They're doing narrations of your poetry. Eso sí funciona. If you have a friend who can compose music too, yeah. There's also a lot of free music out there that you can use through, certain kinds of software, like Adobe Spark, for example, does give you access to Adobe Stock. And you can, even though if it's free, you might have a limitation on how many songs and videos you can use, but there are definitely things like Shutterstock, stock photography, stock music does exist out there, and it's free. You just sometimes have to give credit, that's all. But there is free music out there. Canva works. The only reason why I promote Adobe is because once you have your Adobe account, you also have access to Adobe Spark, Photoshop, Lightroom, Adobe Stock. There's a lot of different types of software, graphic design software that's free, gives you limited access, but it is a free account that you can create. You get 2 gigabytes of memory, of cloud storage that you can share between the different apps. Prisma, yeah. And then if you want to upgrade later with Adobe, you always can upgrade and pay, I think it's $20 a month for the minimum, for the cheapest software. And that's basically the same with any other content generator like Canva, if you want to pay the premium.
Hey, Luis, do you pay for Spark?
I have it free as part of my subscription with Adobe. So I pay the Creative Cloud thing. So I have access to I think it's 20 different apps because of
that's
my
cool.
Yeah. So I also get things like Adobe Premiere for video editing. Premiere Rush is the one that I use to actually do very quick, short edits of these lessons. And I also have access to things like Dreamweaver, which I can use to create websites. There's Encore, which is for editing music and sound. So there's all sorts of different things that Adobe offers.
And you only pay the
for that? Yeah. So if you want to get into video editing, sound editing, even just for say sending contracts, you can use Adobe Sign and Adobe PDFs, Acrobat PDF creator and manipulator to do a lot of different things. So it is worth it, although it is kind of expensive. It's a yearly subscription for the level of work that I'm doing. But like I said, $20 a month gets you Lightroom and Photoshop and access to Adobe Spark.
Nice.
Yeah.
I was thinking of, I was wondering if there was any other offer that included Spark posts, because I just wanted to remove the little watermark on the bottom. But I mean, if that sounds like the better deal.
It is, in my opinion, it is. And you get Spark Video too. So Spark Posts, Spark Video. And there's also one called Spark Pages, which allows you to create simple landing pages for websites. So, todo eso voy a incluir en la lección de la semana que entra, los varios recursos que existen para gente que busca empezar a crear su propio manuscrito y publicaciones. good podcast hosting site. Well, Paola mentioned Station Head. To host a podcast, I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can distribute a podcast. You can do something like SoundCloud. You can do iTunes, Station Head. Most of them are free. If you're uploading for free and your podcast is free for people to download, then most places won't charge you. They'll just start charging you when you start charging your customers, your listeners. And, that's going to be a percentage of whatever you're charging. Igual para uno que quiere empezar a distribuir ebooks. Los ebooks también hay varios recursos que uno puede usar para subir y distribuir en formatos digitales, pero si uno va a cobrar, típicamente el servicio que usa uno va a empezar a cobrarle. But, part of the reason why you would charge for your work is because it took you a shitload of time to make it, El libro que yo publiqué, por ejemplo, el último, Love Notes, ese incluye 15 años de poesía. Son 15 años de poesía que yo he escrito sobre el amor. Y eso no se puede contar. O sea, el costo de 15 años, eso es innumerable. Yeah, Mauricio is one of the few people that actually bought the book. And he thinks it's a bargain. I appreciate that you think it's a bargain. Pero sí es un libro que yo puedo considerar que sí es algo medio caro. But if you think it's a bargain, then I'm happy because it tells a story. So Nettie recommends La Lista podcast. Para ustedes que están recomendando, ¿pueden hablar un poquito más sobre el servicio? Paola, Station Head o Nettie, La Lista. ¿Qué es La Lista?
Okay, Lista Podcast is a podcast based in Boyle Heights. It's a pretty cool guy. I think he's who Raymond Dive. He interviews a lot of Latino writers in the Hollywood scene, self-published writers or poets. So I think everybody has a third chance to be invited to the show because the guy is pretty cool and it's a good chance to promote your work. So why not follow them and see what the podcast is about?
Yeah. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, if you want to do anything, really, look at what other people are doing and how they're doing it and take what's good for them and figure out what's good for you and put it all together. If you could even, for example, with a podcast, if you have a phone that has a recorder on it, that could be it. Like that's all you need to actually record a podcast. If you want to do a vlog, and you want to put something up on YouTube, if you have a phone that has video capabilities, shoot video of yourself using your phone, post it to YouTube, post it to Instagram, post it wherever, and then you slowly begin to build that following, and that's how you market. All of it is marketing when it comes down to it. Cada medio de comunicación, ya sea una red social o hasta un email. Usando email es una de las maneras más reconocidas como manera de vender cosas. I mean, yes, sometimes you can run the risk of spamming people by sending out too much email, too many marketing emails. But hey, if you have people that are actually buying because you're saying, hey, friends, I have a new zine that just came out. Check it out on my website. Hey, you're doing the work of a business. So, yeah. Let's see, Mauricio. Oh, yes, when I was trying to figure out how to market my poetry, I spent hours looking up other poetry sites and pages to see how they did it too. Yeah. Eventually you do find what feels right for you and what doesn't. See, San Juanita. Yes, I've heard of the Los Angeles Poets Society. They're a great group, and part of actually doing especially literary things means going out and interacting with the literary community. So ahorita hay que aprovechar que se puede hacer todo desde la casa, usando Zoom o usando Google Meet. Going to open mics in the past might have been difficult because of the time and the distance, but ahorita más que nunca uno puede asistir a varios eventos hasta en un día y ser audiencia. Sorry, I'm trying to keep up with the chat here. Yeah, the Poetry Society, LA Poet Society, yeah, they're great. They hold poetry readings. Tina, your question about what are we referring to there? We're referring to LA Poet Society?
No, just ignore that.
Okay. Yeah, network yourselves, let other groups know you and your style. Yeah, Mauricio, good advice. Paola says that Station Head is a free app that you download, schedule, and record your podcast. You can include music too from Spotify and iTunes. The only inconvenience is that it only works on iPhones. Yeah. So if you have an iPhone, you have options. Even I think people with Android phones have a lot of different options too. That's why things like SoundCloud are a really good option, because SoundCloud is web-based. So you don't even have to have a phone to be able to listen to a SoundCloud-based podcast. If you have a laptop or a computer, that's really all you need. Yeah, Mauricio, that's what you get for having a Samsung phone. So, but yeah, like I said, really find the things that are free and that are basically multi-platform. A lot of times the quality is actually good, and you can access it later, which is also important. And like I said, especialmente si uno tiene uno de estos, ¿verdad? Un celular, un smartphone. Hay mucha capacidad en un smartphone, sea el que sea. I mean, you can even have what people sometimes refer to as an Obama phone. Those Obama phones, they're very basic Android phones, but a lot of times they actually do have the capacity to do some of these things that we're talking about. Mauricio, last question. How much time do you think you need to invest to get really good at editing photography or images when learning Adobe? I feel like the most time I take is in choosing an image and editing it. So the learning curve, if you're using whether that be Photoshop or Lightroom, it's going to be different. Now, if you're doing basic edits, it kind of comes down to your individual style. Sometimes I find that just doing the automatic edit and just clicking auto in Lightroom works really, really well. If you're talking about Photoshop gives you way more control, and that excess in control can sometimes be overwhelming. But it's really going to come down to your personal preference. I mean, even something as simple as a Snapseed, which is an app that works on both Android and on iPhone. Snapseed is really, really good for editing photos. It's actually what we taught people to use when we did Snapshots of South Central. So the majority of those photos in that book were all edited by participants using Snapseed. Very basic editing app with a lot of power. So I really don't have an answer to your question, Mauricio, other than to say, it's a matter of personal preference and personal taste and what works best for your project. If you want something that looks really grungy because the poem or the story that you wrote is sort of dark and gothic, then you're going to go that route. It'll come sort of intuitively to you. Sobre todo, siempre tomen en cuenta que lo que uno hace artísticamente es para uno mismo primero, ante todos. We are always creating artwork for ourselves that we enjoy. Then we worry about what other people think. And ultimately, you'll find that a lot of people will actually, relate with you if you're being true to yourself. Yeah. So, like Mauricio wrote, when it comes to editing photos, tone of your work goes hand in hand with your color and brightness, poetry and images. So, yeah. So, any other questions or algún comentario? No? All right. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. Si tienen alguna pregunta en otro tiempo, en otro día, siempre pueden usar Google Classroom. I'm glad you came up with the zine idea, Mauricio, or haikus. Excellent. But yeah, feel free to ask any questions that you have in Google Classroom. It is a resource for us to be able to share information. Así que úsenlo como eso, como un recurso. And if in case you in the future need help getting started with anything, also like say a podcast, or you want to kind of practice using say Lightroom or Photoshop or Spark, in the future, once we're able to start meeting again, those are the kinds of things that you'll have access to through the DSTL Arts Mobile Art Lab. Gracias a Dios he logrado recibir fondos para crear el último Mobile Art Lab, lo que va a ser el recurso de recursos para ustedes. It's the Mobile Art Lab is if you're not familiar or haven't seen it before, it is a little camper that is going to come with a printer, a large format printer, and also some tablets that you'll be able to use to actually access Photoshop and Spark and all of these other things that I've been talking about for you to start making your own zines and your own artwork and prints, because that's really important to be able to print your work. So ahí los mantendré en comunicación cuando se trata de eso. Y yeah, next week we'll talk. The Mobile Art Lab is mobile, so I don't have it yet. It is being currently built. So I'll have it hopefully by the end of the year. That's more or less the timeline that I was given. And it'll be traveling throughout LA. So I'll be letting you guys know when you'll be able to have access to it. Pero sí, ese va a ser un recurso que vamos a tener. It's not a truck, but it's a camper. So it's an actual little camper. Right and wordy. I like that. And yeah, I'll probably try to make it out to the valley too. So it'll travel all over LA. Wherever I have a place that people want it to come, it'll be making appearances. So yeah. La semana que entra voy a tener otra lección para ustedes. Les voy a enseñar cómo empezar un presupuesto. Because a lot of times, budgeting is one of those things that we definitely need to take into account when we're talking about any kind of project that we want to do, whether that be a book or a series of workshops o lo que sea. Eso es lo que vamos a repasar la semana que entra. So with that said, I'll be posting up one last assignment, which will be to give me suggestions for the title for the new Conchas y Café zine, and also a a suggestion for the next theme that you guys want to write about. And yeah, I think that's it. So, ahí los veré. Everybody, hope you all have a great night, and we'll see you next week. Bye.